thank you for welcoming us home. And thank you for reminding me that I am and will be whilst I breathe a Scot.
That's the late Ian Charleson, a wonderful actor who died way too soon as the great Scottish sprinter Eric Liddell in Chariots of Fire, one of my all-time favorite movies.
Classic. That made me want to be an Olympian and Kirk a chorus member in a Gilbert and Sullivan musical.
For he's an Englishman. Okay, that's enough of that.
Accents, singing. No wonder you're in L.A. That Eric Liddell speech was from a Scottish folk festival. And as Liddell says thank you to the crowd, boys can be seen kicking a ball about in the background. It is a tribute to Scottish patriotism and identity that will be a big part of our story today.
Because Scotland qualified for this summer's World Cup. They're 9th. And in June, they'll be traveling to Foxborough, Massachusetts to play Haiti and Morocco. And when the Scottish team arrives with its Tartan Army of fans, they'll be retracing the journey of their ancestors who emigrated to the United States in the 19th century and brought soccer with them.
Years before another Scot brought it to Brazil. That's right, Thomas Donahue is now considered the true father of Brazilian soccer, not Englishman Charles Miller. Donahue brought the game to a Rio de Janeiro textile factory in 1894. Before Miller even arrived back in Sao Paulo with a rule book and some soccer balls.
So it's also pretty cool that Scotland will play its third group game against Brazil.
While England claims to be the home of the world's game, the Scots were, in my estimation, its most influential missionaries, the ground troops for the spread of a certain type of football. So this is a story about immigration that we think will be interesting to any U.S. soccer fan.
But it is also a shameless pander to what we hope to be a new and enormous Scottish audience. To keep us focused, we're going to tell much of the Scottish story through the lens of perhaps the greatest Scottish-American soccer player.
Our apologies to John Harkes and Stu Holden.
We're talking about a guy who was called the Babe Ruth of U.S. soccer.
Who one observer thought was better than Pelé.
Who set a goal-scoring record that would last for 87 years until it was broken by a guy named Lionel Messi.
His name? Archie Stark. And I got to chat with his family to learn more about this largely forgotten soccer legend.
Scottish friends, this one is for you. Welcome home. But it's also for anyone who wants to celebrate the immigrants who have made our country and the sport of soccer here great. This is an American game.
Okay. I want to start off by saying that a teaser is a teaser. I've learned this working with Kirk, and I never saw Archie Stark play. But we're not going to claim he was better than Pelé.
My partner, Dr. McCabe, has credibility to maintain. I have none. Archibald McPherson Stark may have been the greatest soccer player of all time. Born in Glasgow okay, here's an interesting thing. It's not 100% clear when he was born. Wikipedia will tell you December 21st, 1897. Another historian cites 1898. This, I guess, is an occupational hazard, right, Professor?
Indeed. Documentation from 130 years ago can be inconsistent. And sometimes, as we've seen in other episodes, a quote-unquote fact is mistakenly established by one legitimate source, and that becomes the first pebble in an avalanche of misinformation. I don't know where the 1897 originally came from, but the Stark family Bible records, in his mother's handwriting, that he was born in the family home at 21 Seymour Street on December 21st, 1896, at 2:30 p.m. It was a Monday.
I am convinced.
Contemporaneous accounts aren't infallible, but the family Bible is one heck of a primary source.
So let's say he was born in 1896, and when his family emigrated to Kearney, New Jersey in 1912, they were following a path that, for Scots, was already over 200 years old.
Which makes Scotland's games in Massachusetts a homecoming of sorts. While Scots had been coming to the colonies before the Revolution, the growth of industry in the Northeast in the second half of the 19th century created a demand for labor that Scottish workers were eager to fill. From the thread mills of Kearney, New Jersey, up to the linen factories of Fall River, Massachusetts, Scots came, settled, and played soccer on their days off, usually for factory teams.
As our friends Patrick Sullivan and Frank McDonald have told us, Scots were also cutting stone in Georgia and timber in the Pacific Northwest, where soccer was being played in the 1880s. But the fertile crescent of U.S. soccer in the late 19th century was, roughly, from New York to Providence, Rhode Island, the easiest places for newly arrived immigrants to settle and find work.
Which is not to say it was an easy trip, though it was a lot cheaper than Scots will be spending this summer on airfare and hotels.
But hey, at least FIFA made tickets really expensive and has taken a 30% fee on every sale and resale. Well, I'm Gianni Infantino. I like the football. I love the money. Oh, by the way, Scottish fans, if you think you're coming to watch a game in Boston, you are not. You are going to Foxborough, Massachusetts, to a stadium owned by erotic massage enthusiast Robert Kraft, whose much younger second wife absolutely loves him for his personality. Foxborough is 30 miles outside of Boston, and apparently the price of a train ticket to and from the game has been quadrupled just for the World Cup.
Makes steerage class on a steamer in 1880 sound pretty good, doesn't it? And at Kirk's request, we're going to take a beat to talk about what travel to the U.S. was like for the Scots and other immigrants in the late 19th century.
Yeah, look, my ancestors were coming over around then, and one left what would become Lithuania when he was about 20 years old. He actually never knew exactly when his birthday was and made his way to Glasgow, then got a steamer for New York. And I've always wondered, how did that work? I mean, we've seen the old movies, but as we were researching this story, I still had questions.
But whether you're from Lithuania or Scotland, remember that there were all sorts of push and pull factors going into these decisions to leave home. There was famine, political turmoil, war, religious persecution, the sort of stuff we still see today.
Yeah. Just get to what the boats were like.
Okay. First of all, the progression from sail to steam in the second half of the 19th century was huge. The average travel time from Liverpool to New York in the 1850s was 40 days. Biblical, you could say. That's because the winds required a long, indirect route, and you were also at the mercy of the winds. By 1869, steamships were able to make the trip in around 10 days. At least one branch of my family was a two-boater. The fare to British North America, a.k.a. the Dominion of Canada, was cheaper, so you'd sail there, work to raise money for the next fare, and then on to the second boat, to Boston or New York.
Glasgow was the rest stop for my ancestors. Thousands of Russians and Lithuanians stopped there to work and save up for the boat. And a lot just ended up staying there. Tickets consistently cost around £4 to £6, which would be about $1,000 today. But people making the journey would also have to factor in the lost wages from the trip, the opportunity cost. So when steamships meant you were only missing a week or so of work, it was a lot more attractive to emigrate than if you were losing over a month.
And back in the 1850s, people also had to bring their own food.
See, that is stuff I did not know.
The average ship carried 15 to 20 passengers in the cabin. The rest were housed in steerage, large rooms in the belly of the ship. If the winds or weather were bad and the trip took longer than expected, those people could run out of food and even starve to death. They were the infamous coffin ships, where humans were treated like cargo. Though, remember, humans being brought to the United States as cargo was, at the time, a well-established practice that would soon lead to a civil war.
Conditions were better by the 1870s when our soccer immigration story really begins. A shipping executive named William Inman and his wife actually traveled in steerage on one voyage to see what their customers were going through. After that, the Inman line provided at least 2 cooked meals a day and a bit of space to eat it in. They were also getting some competition from the new White Star line, which guaranteed separate berths for each adult steerage passenger, along with 10 square feet of baggage allowance. Before that, Passengers could only bring what they could carry. And again, think of how much of that was probably food for the trip.
White Star's steerage ticket included 3 cooked meals a day, mostly porridges, stews, and gruel.
I gotta say, even if it was gruel, I would have called it porridge.
That's just basic marketing.
Yeah, like how Chilean sea bass is actually something called a Patagonia toothfish, but no one ever wanted to eat that because it sounded gross. So back in 1977, a seafood wholesaler just made up a new name that sounded a lot tastier.
And for a guy I used to play with, Louis Janota, this is a seafood game.
But we can bring it back to an American game because the White Star Line made a significant contribution to the history of U.S. soccer.
That's right. In 1880, a silk spinner from Macclesfield, England, named Thomas Tufnell emigrated to New Jersey with his wife and baby. Within a few months, the 21-year-old Tufnell helped form Paterson Football Club. There's a black and white photograph of all these Englishmen in America as full-kit wankers.
The only problem? No one in Paterson had a ball. Soccer was being played in the U.S., but the balls were still rare and precious.
Tommy and some friends went across the Hudson River to go shopping in New York, but struck out there too. So Tufnell asked some sailor friends on the steamship Adriatic to bring a ball back with them the next time they sailed to Liverpool.
So, let's say by 1880, a Scottish immigrant was likely to make it to New York quickly and alive, which dovetailed with a growing demand to emigrate. Among the Scots leaving Glasgow for the New World were people who have come to be known as the Scotch Professors.
I have a whole lecture on the Scotch Professors in the course that I teach. Here are the cliff notes. The Scotch Professors were a group of players and coaches who developed a new style of play, one based on short passing and movement. It was a total contrast to the English game, which was dependent on individuality, physicality, and dribbling. This short passing game developed in Glasgow in the late 19th century, before British trade routes and colonialism brought Scots around the world, teaching their version of the game well into the 20th century.
Our English friends like to take credit for the game. It's coming home, etc. But Scottish football historians argue that the game that took the world by storm has Scottish DNA. It was the work of those Scotch Professors.
And I've learned all this from 3 main sources. The folks at the Scottish Football Museum, the public historians from Football's Square Mile, an outdoor football museum in Glasgow, and the Scottish Football Historians Group. It's a trifecta of historians trying to correct the narrative. When I took a walking tour of Glasgow, I was asked this question: who's your greatest Scotch professor? And I went with Archie Stark,
greatest player in the history of the world. Archie's life is a window into the life of a soccer immigrant back in what we've called the first chapter of U.S. soccer history, the 50-ish years leading up to the first World Cup in 1930. He's a reminder that, contrary to what you're hearing a lot in soccer media right now, the game didn't arrive in the United States in the 1970s.
A couple of the new documentaries that are out right now are called When Soccer Came to America and Soccer Meets America. And surprise, surprise, the main focus of both is the North American Soccer League, which was a watershed, but it was also very far down the American soccer timeline. It was basically the start of what Kirk and I have identified as Chapter 3 of our soccer history.
The NASL folded officially in 1985, just a few months before Archie Stark died. That's not when soccer met America. Archie was an international star 60 years earlier.
And going back even farther, when Archie's family caught a White Star boat to New York in 1912, Thomas Tufnell's Paterson FC was already 31 years old. We support our colleagues in the soccer media,
most of them,
and both of those documentaries are very well done and feature people we respect. But the narrative that soccer essentially arrived in the U.S. with the NASL makes our soccer town alarms go off.
Back to our story. If White Star Ocean Liner in 1912 made some alarms go off for you, yes, the Stark sailed in May, just a few weeks after the Titanic sank. I cannot imagine how scary that must have been. Archie later said, quote, I believe that I spent the 9-day trip looking for icebergs, unquote.
Young Archie started out playing amateur ball for West Hudson Juniors, and then, at the age of 18, turned professional and joined the Carney Scots, a club that still plays to this day. Shout out to our friends at the Scotch American Club on Patterson Street. We held our very first public screening of Soccertown, USA there.
In 1915, Archie played with his older brother Tommy on the Carney Scots. Tommy, a tough fullback who, according to that family Bible, was born on January 8th, 1895, played just behind Archie, who was out on the wing. The Scots faced Brooklyn Celtic in the final of the AFA Cup, which was the country's first cup competition and was, back then, a pretty big deal.
My hunt for the AFA Cup was the subject of our second episode last season. In 1915, Brooklyn was a heavy favorite. The Scots had made it to two previous finals in 1907 and 1910 that had come up empty both times. And the game in 1950 in front of 5,000 fans in Newark was a cagey affair. That was until a certain scrawny teenager put in the only goal of the game. Archie was carried off the field, and instead of a match report, a newspaper wrote a poem about the boy wonder. I mean, I wanted to recite it, but, Kirk is the English major, no bad poetry.
It's just not a good poem. 2 years later, on April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. At a meeting of the Erie Athletic Association, a club in the heart of Kearney's Cooper's Block neighborhood, a member got up and said, quote, "Suppose we devote our energy in the interest of Uncle Sam instead of thinking about football, baseball, and basketball," unquote. A few guys volunteered immediately, which then started a race to see who would be next. 70% of the Athletic Association ended up signing up.
Throughout this immigrant-heavy area, there was pressure to deny your roots and pledge allegiance to the United States. Of course, for the Scots, that came with some humorous complications. George Yawkey Post joked as he filled out the draft form. Did occupation mean Catholic or Protestant?
Now, at this point, Archie was playing for Babcock and Wilcox, a boiler supplier to the U.S. Navy. One of his teammates was Paisley-born Bob Miller, another Scotch professor who will come back in this story. Everyone was signing up for the war effort, part of the national campaign for 100% Americanism.
Even the newly formed U.S. Soccer Football Association was barring aliens from holding office. Over in Newark, the German-American mayor was voted out of office, and Hamburg Place was renamed Wilson Avenue.
Scary times in U.S. history, as our most xenophobic times usually are. So, with Archie and his soccer buddies shipping off to fight the Hun, let's take a quick break to think about how a nation of immigrants can be so consistently anti-immigrant. Honestly, been thinking about that enough lately. Let's just hang out for a minute and beg for engagement.
If you're listening to this, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're a listener, but are you a subscriber? It gets you nothing, but on the other hand, it's free.
And it will help us be able to keep making episodes of An American Game. So, if you would be so kind, just take a moment to find the show on whatever platform you're using,
and just click follow show or subscribe or whatever makes it automatically download so you never miss an episode.
And then absolutely go find the documentaries we were talking about, When Soccer Came to America and Soccer Meets America, and check them out. There are a lot of people doing good work in telling our soccer story.
What Kirk and I are doing is a complement to that work, not a competitor. As long as they don't pretend the game didn't exist before Pele, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, then the earrings are coming off. And speaking of titanic battles for the free world, let's get back to Archie Stark and the Scotch Professors, who are getting ready to sail back across the ocean to fight in the Great War. It's August 16, 1917, and like a lot of Scottish soccer players, Archie Stark found himself called by king and country. Remember, he was still a British subject, and Tom has shown me paperwork from the Royal Flying Corps for attestation of short service, meaning for the rest of the war.
That's right. Archie was drafted by Mother England. On that paperwork, Archie is asked, quote, "Did you receive a notice and do you understand its meaning?" End quote. He answered, yes. He agreed to serve and then signed an oath. But there are two additional notes scribbled across the form.
Primary documents.
Yes. They ask questions and answer them. And here we go. The first reads, struck off strength. Had to look that up. That's a bit of an archaic notice that Archie never joined the Royal. I can't say royal. God damn.
That's the Irish in you.
That's a bit of an archaic notice that Archie never joined the Flying Corps. The other note says, deserter.
This is a controversial one for Archie's family for obvious reasons, but the note is a classic letter, not spirit of the law.
Yes, there's been some confusion over which side Archie was going to fight on. He'd been in the U.S. for 5 years. All of his friends were mustering with the American forces. So yes, he deserted from the English Army. Remember, he had signed an oath and enlisted in a newly formed air service in the U.S. Army.
After basic training, he shipped off to France by way of Hoboken, New Jersey. He may have actually crossed paths with Hobie Baker from the Princeton class of 1914, one of the greatest athletes in Princeton history. Sorry, Tom. Hobie was the greatest hockey player of his time, as well as a top football player, swimmer, tennis player. He could apparently do anything well, including fly a plane. When the war broke out, he volunteered for a civilian aviation corps in New York, and he learned to fly. Then he shipped off to France in the summer of 1917. Every year, the best college hockey player in the country still wins an award named for Hobie Baker.
Archie was fortunate to avoid combat. Others weren't, like Ben Gunnell, the first Kearney resident killed in action. The Gunnell Oval, the town's main recreation facility, which recently received a multi-million-dollar facelift, pays tribute to him still. It was a dust bowl of soccer activity when I played there growing up.
Hobie Baker also didn't make it home. He died in a crash the day he got his discharge papers. He was taking one last flight to test a plane that had just been repaired. If you want to learn more about Hobie Baker, I recommend my unproduced movie about him. But honestly, I did a lot of research on Hobie years ago, so some of his experience in France has put some color on what Archie probably went through. Hobie was also an athlete, right? And he used to organize baseball games and other sports to keep fit and keep morale up. Archie probably found pickup games while he was serving. We've talked before about how soccer was used by the U.S. Army for training, and there were plenty of guys in France who would have been up for a game. Archie also later claimed to have won the inter-service 100-yard dash title.
That speed was always one of his biggest weapons on the field. A bit of Michael Owen in him.
When Archie got back to the U.S. in 1919, he signed with Paterson FC. Quote, "I had to," he said. "I had just got married to a Kearney girl, of course," unquote. This was Elizabeth McCallan, the daughter of Irish immigrants. They would soon have a son, Billy, who would later play pro ball himself.
I've been a guest in Archie's Kearney home twice, chatting about the man with his granddaughter, Margaret Stark Santos, and her husband, Larry. Marge remembers her grandfather as Papa, and her kids called him Papa Upstairs because he lived on the second floor after Lizzie passed away in 1966. He'd have cookies and milk for the great-grandkids, and he'd usually hear the quiet chords of orchestra music he loved so much.
Paterson FC was a good team, but the industrial war boom in America led to some powerhouse clubs like the mighty Bethlehem Steel. These shipyard and munitions companies had the cash to poach the best players from other clubs. The USSFA formed a committee to investigate the practice, but the AFA did nothing because it wanted those great teams in its competition.
Aside from the AFA Cup and the National Challenge Cup, which were often confused with one another, teams competed in the National Association Football League and industrial leagues like the Shipbuilders League and the Manufacturers League. The AFA semifinal round in 1918 pitted 4 war-worked teams against one another. Bethlehem won its 3rd title in a row, edging out Archie's old team at Babcock and Wilcox. Quote, "The Bethlehem team was also fortunate in keeping the squad intact all through the season. They have not lost a player, either through enlistment or the draft," reported one newspaper.
So were they just lucky, or did Bethlehem have the political juice to keep its players home and safe?
It wasn't really luck, right? The steel and shipbuilding industries in the U.S. were deemed essential for the duration of the war. We had to have a steady supply of steel to make our war material. Bethlehem steel was essential, and so were some of its soccer players.
In the 1918-19 season, with Archie, one of the first soccer veterans back from the war, Bethlehem Steel faced Paterson FC in the finals of the AFA Cup and the National Challenge Cup, and beat Stark's team both times, which made Bethlehem Steel the undisputed top club in the U.S., which got them invitations to tour Scandinavia and Brazil.
While the Brazil tour never came together, Thomas Cahill, that forgotten father of American soccer, who seems to be mentioned in every episode, set up the Scandinavian tour from his position as Secretary of the United States Football Association. This would be a triumphant return for Cahill, who had brought the first U.S. national team to Scandinavia back in 1916.
Wait, I thought soccer started here in the 1970s. Anyway, Kirk, you bitch. Anyway, Cahill grabbed some guest players for Bethlehem Steel's roster, including Archie Stark and Paterson teammate and future Hall of Famer Davy Brown. The Swedish-American liner Stockholm departed on July 24th, 1919, and the 13-day trip was packed with training for guys whose season had ended back in April. The coach, William Billy Sheridan, said, quote, "It is only natural that the players are somewhat out of condition. The boat is big enough to carry on training en route, and there are sure to be some strenuous sessions of rope jumping, bouncing around the medicine ball, lengthy sprints, and many other forms of training," unquote.
Archie and the Bethlehem team returned home at the end of September after going 7-2-5 and outscoring their opponents 22-14. According to the ship's manifest, Archie had $15 in his pocket when he disembarked. He reunited with his family and became a naturalized citizen. On December 4th, he declared that he absolutely and entirely renounced and abjured all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, state, or sovereignty, and particularly George V, King of Great Britain and Ireland. That Ireland bit stings. No kings.
Archie spent the next couple of years playing for the Erie Athletic Association team, Erie FC, basically a neighborhood team from Cooper's Block in Kearney. They'd grown up together, went off to war, and then came back to play together again. In 1921, after Tom Cahill formed the American Soccer League, Erie FC changed its name to Harrison SC. See, even back then, we were confused between FC and SCs. The locals couldn't pay Archie like the deeper pockets across the Hackensack and Hudson Rivers, so he took his talents to New York's Field Club, where he scored 45 goals in 69 games over 3 seasons. But bigger titles were out of reach. Stark needed a bigger club.
Archie, Elizabeth, and young Billy took 2 trips to Scotland in the summer of 1923 and 24. And it seems likely that he would have talked to some Scottish clubs. But he wasn't a young prospect anymore. He was in his late 20s, and at a whippet-like 5'9", he didn't fit the prototypes of either the towering English striker or the stocky Scottish one.
He was neither tree nor troll.
But this was the back and forth of pro soccer in the 1920s, with English and Scottish teams having more established history, but the new ASL making a big splash and often paying higher wages.
One of the greatest Scottish players of the time was Alec Jackson, known as the Gay Chevalier. Born in Renton, Alec was 8 years younger than Archie. And in 1924, when he was playing for Dumbarton, he told the team he wanted to visit his older brother, Waddy, short for Walter, who had emigrated to Detroit. Once in the U.S., Alec and Waddy signed on with Bethlehem Steel, where Alec could make $50 a game. That was about £12 at a time when the salary cap in the UK was £8 a week.
But then the Jackson brothers, perhaps pining for haggis and black pudding, pulled the same trick the other way. They told Bethlehem Steel that they were going back to Scotland for a family visit, and both had signed for Aberdeen and played their first game before Bethlehem knew anything about it.
Bethlehem Steel quickly approached Archie. As he later recalled, quote, When I left New York FC to play for Bethlehem, Wilbur Lewis, owner of the Steelers, dickered with me on how much I should get in salary. Since the two Jacksons had been receiving $50 each a game, I wanted more.
Bethlehem eventually gave him a $500 signing bonus plus $75 in salary and living expenses, a package worth nearly $200 a week. He was, perhaps, the highest paid player in the world. And he played like it. Moving to center forward, he scored 4 goals in his first game and 67 in the 44-game season.
The next highest scorer, Andy Stevens, had 33. Stark said, quote, "In my first year at Bethlehem, I scored double the goals the Jackson brothers had made before I arrived. Mr. Lewis never regretted the money I received," unquote. Archie's 67 club goals in a year was a world record until Lionel Messi beat it with 79 for Barcelona in 2012.
It's worth pointing out, as we talk about pro soccer players in this era, that Archie was an employee of Bethlehem Steel. The team was a company team, and technically Archie was a draftsman. Larry Santos recalled a conversation with his grandfather-in-law about that. He was given a salary and management said, "You don't have to come to work. All you have to do is show up and play soccer." But Archie said, "No, I want to work for my money." So he actually was a draftsman. Larry and Marge showed me some of Archie's work that they kept in the family attic. Archie later worked on the Manhattan Bridge.
During his time at Bethlehem Steel, Archie also played for the U.S. national team, such as it was. In our first episode this season, we talked about the attempt in the mid-20s to create an annual U.S.-Canada Challenge Series. So in June of 1925, Archie and a U.S. squad lost 1-0 on a rain-soaked field in Montreal.
Canada's goal was scored by Ed McLean, one of their Scotch Professors.
In November, they played a rematch in front of 8,000 people at Ebbets Field. Richard Vidmer wrote in the New York Times, "The United States Soccer 11 slid, skidded, swam, and ran to a 6-1 victory on Ebbets Field, Brooklyn yesterday against the representatives of Canada. Few athletic contests of any sort have been played under more miserable weather conditions, and yet the exhibition of soccer, which requires dexterous footwork, was brilliant despite the hazardous footing. True, there were mud-soaked figures writhing in the mire from start to finish, but they still had enough ability and agility to execute more fancy footwork than the inventor of the Charleston ever imagined."
Again, brilliant. I love the writhing in the mire.
Love writhing in the mire. And honestly, if you're going to do an impression of a sports writer from the 20s and you put in a reference to the Charleston, someone would go, "Nah, man, that's too obvious."
The first half ended at 1-1. But Archie's second half was, according to the Times, quote, "as brilliant a bit of individuality as was ever seen on an American soccer field," end quote. Archie scored 5 goals, Davey had the 6th, and Bob Millar had an assist. Other sources gave Stark 4 goals and Brown 2, but again, that's the challenge when it comes to researching the first chapter of U.S. soccer history. The records are scarce, but we'll trust the Times on this one.
Yeah. When has the New York Times ever steered us wrong? Oh, wait. Here was a headline from a year before that Canada game. "Hitler tamed by prison. Released on parole, he is expected to return to Austria." Anyway, Archie Stark was unstoppable in 1925, and a young newspaper columnist named Ed Sullivan called him the Babe Ruth of American soccer.
According to Archie's grandson-in-law, Larry Santos, Archie met with the future television legend to be photographed for the article. Sullivan wanted him to kick his leg up high and hold it there for the photo. Sounds like the classic gridiron football player pose from that time. Archie tried, but said he couldn't hold his foot up that long. So Sullivan nailed his shoe to the wall. And this picture, I'm on the hunt for this picture. This paper has not been digitized yet. Were some of the racy photographs. It was almost like pornography of its time. So you have to go to New York.
Pre-Hays Code.
Yeah, you got to go to the New York Public Library, where I believe it is available. So any of you, listeners out there who want to get extra credit from the professor, go find it. It will be there.
Eventually, Archie got his foot down from the wall and continued to dominate the American Soccer League over the next few seasons, scoring literally a couple hundred goals for Bethlehem Steel until the 1929-30 season, when the double whammy of the American Soccer Wars, which was mainly the American Soccer League's multi-year rift with the U.S. Football Association over participation in the U.S. Open Cup, and the Great Depression forced Mighty Steel to disband their team. As countless companies and clubs would discover, they just couldn't afford it anymore.
Archie and 9 of his teammates moved to the Nork Americans, and shortly after, Archie was invited to play for the U.S. again, this time in a new tournament that would be happening in Uruguay in the summer of 1930, the very first World Cup. His old friend Bob Millar was the coach, and Archie Stark turned it down.
This is one of the great what-ifs in U.S. soccer history. The American team would finish third in the tournament, losing to Argentina in the semifinal. What if, arguably, their best forward had been there? But Archie's decision made sense at the time and is, again, a good window into that piece of our soccer history.
Archie's great-grandson, Richie Santos, told us, quote, he was starting a business at home, and at the time, it being the first World Cup, I don't think anyone knew what it was all about, end quote. Both of those things are true. The World Cup wasn't the World Cup yet. FIFA had wanted its own tournament separate from the Olympics, but even some U.S. newspapers were unaware that it was a World Championship, referring it to simply as the team's South American Tour. 2 months before the start of the tournament, no team from Europe had officially entered. Jules Rimet, the president of FIFA, almost didn't go.
And Archie was starting a car dealership with his brother-in-law. Between the voyage to Montevideo, the tournament, and the trip home, the national team would be gone for 81 days. When you're trying to launch a new business, that is a big opportunity cost. Not to mention the time away from his family. His son Billy was 11 years old.
But Archie had another conflict. The Fall River Marksmen had scheduled their own shorter tour of Europe for that August. And with their star, Bert Patnow, playing in the World Cup, they recruited Archie to take his spot.
Scottish friends, we mentioned at the top that Fall River, Massachusetts, an industrial powerhouse at the end of the 19th century, was one of the prime destinations for Scottish immigrants. So it's no surprise that it also became a soccer powerhouse. The Marksmen and the Fall River Rovers were dominant teams in early U.S. soccer. And when you're in Foxborough, it'll be 30 miles south of you. Same distance as Boston, probably a cheaper train ticket. We know Scots like a cheaper train ticket.
As long as we're playing travel agent, Scottish fans should consider staying in Pawtucket, a.k.a. The Bucket. It's 20 miles from Fall River, 20 from the stadium, and home to Rhode Island FC, a USL Championship club that's hosting Scottish Heritage Night on May 23rd.
I've been to a Rhode Island game. They have got a beautiful stadium along the Seekonk River, and it's only a mile from the old Slater Mill, birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution.
Soccer, historic mills, the Guild Brewing Company. Sounds like a dream vacation to me.
Anyway, back in May 1930, as the U.S. World Cup team was being selected, Archie played with Fall River in a friendly against Rangers FC, the Scottish champions who were on their own tour. Archie scored, of course, which only cranks up the what-if meter.
Though Archie stayed home, the Scotch Professors were well represented on the U.S. national team. In fact, their Belgian opponents in the first World Cup game heard so many British accents that they accused the U.S. of using foreign ringers. Bart McGee of Edinburgh was the first Scot to score at a World Cup, when he scored for the U.S. in that game, assisted by James Brown of Kilmarnock, who would tally the lone goal in the semi-final loss to Argentina. Alexander Wood of Lochgelly, the son of a Scottish international, was the left back. A Stevenston native and survivor of the Battle of the Somme, Andrew All stood guard in midfield.
And James Gallagher of Kirkintilloch, a skillful winger, completed the Scottish-American quintet that led the U.S. to its best ever World Cup finish of third. Add to that group the trainer Jack Cole and manager Bob Millar, and you've got what is now called the Magnificent Seven. 7 members of the U.S. team and staff that all had Scottish roots. The U.S. then played a series of exhibitions as they made their way from Montevideo back to Rio de Janeiro, trying to claw back some of the money they lost from being away so long. And on the 20th of August, while the U.S. team was finally boarding a steamship in Rio for the long journey home, Archie scored for Fall River in the first game of their European tour, a 2-2 tie against Slavia in Prague. Slavia was coached by ex-Celtic and Scotland player Jack Madden, who brought Scotch Professorship to Central Europe.
Fall River played 6 times in 11 days, in Prague, Vienna, and Budapest. It was a brutal, exhausting schedule. And after a 6-0 defeat to Ferencváros, the team got word that financial difficulties was shutting down the tour. It was a tale of two sides. European folks said that the team was full of American bluff and old fogies, not the regulars from the U.S. champions. As for Fall River, they claimed that they had agreed to the grueling schedule because they had been promised percentage of gate receipts. The more they played, the more they got. Instead, they were only getting flat fees. Regardless, the tour was over, effective immediately.
The team could barely afford to get home, settling for third-class tickets. Hello, gruel. Archie went back to the Newark Americans, a working pro trying to keep his career going as U.S. pro soccer collapsed around him. In 1932, the ASL folded, along with the Newark Americans. He joined the Carney Irish, which played in a rebooted semi-pro ASL.
By 1934, he was too old to get an invite to the Second World Cup. But he was the top scorer in the ASL and was an ASL All-Star. And he played on a team against the U.S. national team in a send-off game. Archie scored a hat trick in a 3-1 ASL victory. That U.S. team managed to beat Mexico in a play-in game before losing to Italy in Rome. The coach was David Gould, born in Galston, another Scotch professor. In fact, the first 3 managers to lead the U.S. at the World Cup were all born in Scotland.
Archie never got to play in a World Cup, and even though his reasons were, in context, understandable, it dented his legacy a bit compared to other early American stars like Billy Gonzalez and Burt Patnaud. But still, in 1950, Archie would be the first inductee into the National Soccer Hall of Fame, and he was named the best American player of the first half-century, all for what he'd managed to do in a little more than a decade. Though he'd lit the brightest spotlight of U.S. soccer's first chapter, Archie couldn't stop the darkness from creeping in during the second.
This was soccer's retreat to the ethnic enclaves that had birthed it, the places that kept it alive for the next 50 years. Archie was in the middle of one of them, doing what a lot of ex-jocks did, including earlier U.S. soccer stars like Denny Shea and Jack Swithenby. He opened a bar. In 1935, Stark's Tavern started pouring pints on Carney Ave. A black and white photograph of Archie tending bar has survived, as have other artifacts saved by the family. Larry Santos brought several items down from the attic, including a championship ring from Bethlehem Steel, but my favorite was a water-stained small sign that hung in Archie's Tavern. It summed up his world view from behind the bar. Kirk's going to let me read a poem now. Quote, "My whiskey's good, so is my beer. Come and enjoy an hour's good cheer. The more you speak as friend to friend, the sooner your worries will end. Keep politics and creeds away, and part to meet another day, with friendships firm from dawn to dark. So here's best wishes, Archie Stark."
Archie's son Bill would take over the tavern, and when he shut it down in 1975, the family donated the large wooden sign that fronted the building to the National Soccer Hall of Fame. But Archie's story isn't one of bitterness or regret. He had a great career, maybe the best possible, at a time when pro soccer was trying to put down deep roots in the U.S. In 1978, he said, quote, "I'm happy. I had some good times in my day. And in those days, the $75 a week I got put me in the big bracket," unquote. But he also seemed to enjoy his decades as a local legend, a magnet for banter and good company.
And he stayed involved in the game. In 1951, he joined his old friends Davy Brown and Billy Gonzalez as official observers for the Olympic tryouts in New Jersey. In a 1949 profile of Gonzalez, the Newark News writer Tom Connell also called him the Babe Ruth of American soccer. I guess there was room for two Babes at Stark's Tavern, because after Billy retired from the game, he worked there for Archie until his death in 1977. Meanwhile, a new generation of Scotch Professors continued to play in and for the United States. In 1950, the U.S. manager Bill Jeffrey picked Ed McIlvaney of Paisley to captain the U.S. squad, the year they famously beat England. And Jeffrey, you guessed it, born in Scotland, Edinburgh in fact. He was the fourth and to this date last Scottish-born manager to lead the U.S. at a World Cup.
The last Scottish-born guy to play for the U.S. in a World Cup also took points off England. In 2010, Stuart the Holden of Aberdeen was a late substitute in a 1-1 draw. All told, to date, 47 Scottish-born players have capped for the USA. Archie also did a bit of coaching, notably for the Carney Irish Americans in the ASL, and he lived long enough to see the game he loved start to come back. The opening lines of the third chapter of U.S. soccer history.
He loved the horse races, but he also loved the cosmos of the NASL, as Kirk and I did. But unlike us, Archie got 2 free tickets to every game as a member of the Hall of Fame. He also got to meet Pelé before the very first Cosmos game at Giant Stadium in 1977. There was a lot of soccer history in that handshake.
Stark later said, "Pelé and the Cosmos did something we were never able to do. They've raised soccer to a major sport in the United States. In my day, soccer was second class in America. We played in small stadiums before 2,000 or so people in towns you'd never heard of," unquote. What he was seeing in the 1970s was what might have happened in the 1930s.
And yes, one Harrison resident was once quoted in a local paper saying that Archie was as good as Pelé. He pointed out, accurately, that the ball and shoes were heavier in Archie's day, and that having watched both men play, he thought Archie shot as well, and that if, quote, Archie were able to play today, he'd amaze you as much as Pelé did all those fans at Giant Stadium last year, end quote.
Archie was flattered, but said, "I don't think I was as great as Pelé. If there are people who feel that way, I can't change their opinion. I don't agree with the comparison," unquote.
A canny Scot. That's good bar banter. Archie did say that he thought some of his old teams were as good as the Cosmos. Quote, "We had some outstanding players and we always played together as a unit," end quote. Team first guy.
Speaking of banter, Stark did once watch Giorgio Canaglia miss a few chances and said, "I'd love to see him playing in my boots and in 3 inches of mud and try to score goals." Banter aside, here's Tom Connell, the longtime soccer scribe for the Newark Evening News, on Archie's retirement in 1934. Quote, "Archie Stark is considered the most artistic and polished center forward in America. Fast, unselfish, and quick to size up a situation, he was a master at his position. As a scorer, he had no superior, being able to shoot the ball either dead or from a hook with skill that made even Scotchmen gasp," unquote.
When Archie died in 1985, he was still living upstairs at his home on Highland Avenue, across from the house where he grew up, with his son and daughter-in-law living downstairs, as well as 3 granddaughters and 4 great-grandchildren who were not living downstairs. All in all, pretty remarkable immigrant story.
And the Scots coming over this summer will, unlike Archie, be arriving in a country where soccer is the 3rd most popular sport. 10% of Americans now say it's their favorite sport, putting it ahead of baseball. And for that, we can credit the waves of immigrants who follow the Scots.
But we should also give a tip of the tam o'shanter to the Scotch Professors, like Archie Stark, who, frankly, taught us not to listen to the English, who loved to say, "We invented the game and gave it to the world."
So go ahead and gloat, Tartan Army. You may get ripped off every minute you're here, but you helped lay the seeds of the game in the United States. Enjoy your visit to a fellow soccer nation.
And that's our story. See you next time on An American Game.
This episode of An American Game is a production of Soccertown Media and was written by me, Kirk Riddell,
And me, Tom McCabe.
If you want to hear more of my thoughts on soccer, Hollywood, or whatever I happen to be annoyed by, and the list is growing, you can find me on Blue Sky at rudell@bsky.com.
As for me, I'll just be reposting Kirk stuff on Instagram.
An American Game is a team effort. Our consulting producers are Matthew Nelson
And Larry Garrity.
Our theme music was composed by our old friend and former teammate, the multi-talented, multi-hyphenate Patrick White.
And special thanks to the Santos family, Marge, Larry, and Richie. Also special thanks to our Scottish friends at the Scottish Football Museum, the Hamdeners, and the Scottish Football Historians Group. And thanks to you for listening.
That makes you part of the team. And if you like what you heard, just give a follow, a subscribe, a rate, a review, or something, or just tell a friend.
We'll see you next time on An American Game.